east-west, north-south like ways to get around through the existing infrastructure.
Is there like an online
Yep.
or just Google master plan for bike?
Yep. Yeah, if you go to Pure Illinois Bike Master Plan, it will probably get you a link to one of the city's websites. The plan is actually due to be updated, start again to like update it this year. So I think it's updated every 4 or 5 years. And then that's where they can go through every 4 or 5 years and say, how much additional infrastructure did we add over the last 4 to 5 years? How many projects did we complete? How many gaps in the network did we close? And that's where you can say, oh, we added X amount of miles of infrastructure over the last 5 years because we closed these gaps in the network by virtue of the plan. And then you can say, we still have this many miles left to go. And then based on that plan, it goes to like, you have to align that plan with the other existing infrastructure priorities, which is where the Transportation Commission assists. They assist the city engineers and the traffic planners to prioritize these projects. This prioritization takes into account like a lot of things, both like how much money do we have to spend within the year, but then like what are the projects in most need? So what streets are in the worst shape? What sidewalks are in the worst shape? How much money have we spent in certain districts year over year to make sure that there's equity in spreading the cash around, right? So are we making sure that we're spending equal amounts to make sure that we're investing in neighborhoods equally, which is a challenging topic, as you can imagine. But then from that, what comes out every year then for the city's budget is what is called the Community Improvement Plan, the CIP. Within that CIP then, it's just a huge list of projects, but rank ordered and prioritized as far as what is the project we could spend and get the most impact for the most things. So it's like, anyway, the Transportation Commission helps rank and prioritize those projects within the plan to get the most benefit for the most people.
Do you guys measure around it actually the bike lanes?
Yeah, that's so. As part of this is where traffic engineers and like engineering and consulting firms for projects to be in the plan, there is a sort of due diligence, there is pre-work. So you do have to have like a pro forma, these are the traffic counts, these are how many people are currently using it, measuring like, the current quality of the infrastructure. So all of this is like within this sort of pro forma of the plan that you can then measure the impact before and after. So there are traffic counts, there are pedestrian counts that go into these plans before and after the project is completed.
Does like pedestrian death count, does that affect you guys? And like also have to take into account like the fact that like there is danger.
Yep. Yeah, so that's one of the key outcomes or one of the key metrics is being able to not just deaths, but just any sort of like traffic related incident. Of course, mortality is like ranked higher, but you're looking at also just like gross amount of traffic accidents that happen in a certain area. And then that will drive like if there is an incentive, if there is a goal to improve safety, then you have to operationalize that somehow. What does it mean to improve safety? Does that mean just adding sidewalks? Does that mean adding like lighted crosswalks? But one of those measures is looking at all-cause mortality along a stretch and saying, how do we reduce that number? And then from that, you can measure other certain tactics, which would then implement safety reforms. And then ideally, because of those implementations, you would see those accidents drop, right? But that takes time to do, and you can only predict so much on the front end. But this is where having best practices from other communities around the country, you can look at and say, in this city that has a larger population, they have a larger sample size, by implementing these safety things, they saw this reduction. And so that can be shared between communities to understand what could work where to improve safety.
The money comes from taxes, right? For the government.
Depends. Yeah.
So is it possible to get funding from like different, like any structures and do from grants?
Oh yeah.
You can ask them. And then with like what you have is awesome. So from what I hear, so you guys already had like roadways that you guys could like paint over. I'm assuming you guys painted the bike lanes or like you guys like actually raised new roads to ground.
Sure. It's a little bit of both. I mean, it's project by project, based on, again, the size of the infrastructure. There's a different what's called treatment, right? There's different treatments for different road sizes and different levels of traffic. Those treatments are all different cost levels. It's pennies on the dollar to just restripe a road, right? Because you're talking about paint and labor effectively. It's much more expensive if you have to dig up the road, the existing road, repave it, re-level it. The full reconstruction is like, I don't know, $1 million a mile, right? Like for like
Highway or sidewalk?
well, I mean, this is where you get into it. So for a sidewalk still, it's probably, if it's a full reconstruction of a mile of sidewalk, it's still probably $250 to $500,000.
$250 to $500,000
$250,000.
for a
Yeah, I mean that's like full like tear out and reconstruction of the sidewalk.
You're just like building.
Yeah.
That,
Yeah.
that's crazy.
Yeah, and then I mean you're talking for a 2-lane road, for a mile of new 2-lane road, fully reconstructed, it's $1 million, $1.5 million a mile.
That's a lot of money. Like that's like
Yeah. And so to your point about funding, I mean, you think about all of the pavement you see. I mean, this is private pavement, but anytime you leave private property and you go onto a public street, I mean, that's technically owned and has to be paid for by all of us. And so you start thinking about how much pavement there is and how much it costs knowing that number. And it's really hard to then pay for that year over year, because like you can put a new road down and you could say 10 miles, let's assume it's a $10 million investment. Great. And it's probably good for 5 to 6 years, but after 5 to 6 years, you have to start repairing it. But if you think every 5 years, if you're building another 10 miles of road somewhere else every 5 years, guess what starts to happen after 20 years? All of this infrastructure starts to deteriorate at the same time. And so you have a sort of this like, anyway, a really precipitous drop off of like, okay, great. Everything was good for a couple of years, but then this net effect just keeps getting worse and worse and worse. And you just have to spend more money year over year because all of this infrastructure that you've been slowly expanding starts to deteriorate. And all of a sudden you have a liability, a huge growing liability that's really hard to fund if you're not growing the tax base, right? If your population is staying the same, then you're building more and more infrastructure. Each individual person has to pay more and more and more to maintain that level of infrastructure, right? And so this is where you have the challenges of like having to increase taxes, having to levy more taxes to pay for more and more infrastructure, right? And so Peoria's not alone. This is a nationwide problem, is that we've been incentivized to overbuild, and by virtue of overbuilding, we can't maintain the infrastructure. If you can't maintain the infrastructure, you have to find a way to remove it or reduce it and right size it. But as soon as you start doing that, people get upset because the convenience is gone. Things have been made really convenient because we overbuilt, but people weren't aware of the cost, the true cost. And then people get really mad when you try to raise taxes to take care of the shared infrastructure. And it's like, well, what do you want? Do you want a more simple infrastructure that's cheaper, or do you want more convenience and bigger infrastructure? That convenience should come at a cost.
DIY business. Like, what if we just got like people together and have like a volunteer operation, got funding from like crowdfunding, and then we just like use that money to buy our own little pavement repair pit.
It's pretty bad. It's not illegal. It's unsafe because there are safety standards for the asphalt and the concrete that's supposed to be used for large projects, and like a weight-rated highway that semi-trucks are safely allowed to travel at speed for X amount of years. So all of that is federally regulated, right? A standard, an engineering design standard that has to be met and complied with. It gets worse because then you start talking about these federal engineering standards that have to be met. And for the engineering, the federal standards are all set to sort of population size and the amount of people living within a certain area. That sort of sets the standard for how big and the standard for the safety standards for a road. But for federal funding, so to your point about grants, your question about grants, is if a local municipality doesn't have the money to pay for the infrastructure, to maintain the infrastructure, they can go after federal grants, right? And there's a number of ways that money comes down for the federal government for infrastructure. Some of it's through like IDNR, the Department of Natural Resources. Some of it's through the Federal Highway Administration. Some of it's through the Department of Transportation. But anyway, if you go to the federal government and you say, hey, we have a bunch of these infrastructure projects, but we, from our own general budget, from the city of Peoria, we can only fund 50 to 60% of what we want to do this year. But we think we can go out and win these grants. You can go out and try to win those grants. And if you get awarded those grants, chances are you have to fit that project to a federal standard. And those federal standards are, they incentivize certain things. A lot of the incentive comes from a measure that's called levels of service. And a level of service rates a roadway from I think it's A to F, A being the best, F being the worst. For this project to be compliant for federal funding, you have to maintain a certain level of service. And that level of service is usually derived on how fast a car can get through that level or that infrastructure. Meaning if that car has to wait at a stoplight for too long, it gets a lower level of service. So the incentive is still for moving car traffic quickly through the streetscape. It doesn't really incentivize pedestrian safety. It doesn't incentivize quality of life for the surrounding neighborhood. It's really how efficiently can this car get through the system. If it has to stop too many times and it slows down, then it's a lower level of service. So you have to build to that standard to get the money. And so you get this system that's continually, if you can't pay for your own infrastructure, if we can't pay to maintain our own infrastructure, we have to build to a federal standard to get money to spend more infrastructure that we can't pay for in the long term. And so it's a cycle you can't break because we need to pay for the things we have, but to do that we have to keep propagating the bad design that we've built in the past. And so it's really hard to break that cycle. Yeah. So it gets really gnarly.
Yeah, so then let's say that we take a different and let's say that we were, how about painting? Like you
Sure.
Are we allowed to just buy a bucket of white paint?
Nope.
So that's also illegal.
Uh-huh.
So then do we have to like go to like the committee in our local area, find a transportation room, and be like, hey, how much is it cost to paint a line? Like lines, white lines.
Yeah.
I could do that.
You could.
Do that.
You could.
Measure the road
Sure.
At like 3 a.m. in the morning, zero traffic, and paint the lines.
Yeah, I mean, you could.
Like at stop signs. Like how is that going to affect the level of service if they're already supposed to full stop? You can
Sure.
just like make it because like I still cross the road even if there is no like super obvious crosswalk. Like, usually when you see a crosswalk, it should technically be like a series of doors. Like there's this one stop. You guys know like how Dawn High School, like there's like the gas station over there, and if you want to cross the road, it's just like two horizontal lines. There's no crosswalk.
Yeah, I mean, the problem with guerrilla stuff. You can do it, but there is liability in the sense of if you change the design environment without proper notification to pedestrian and car users. Especially if somebody's driving a car and they're not used to people being there and feeling comfortable being there, but all of a sudden you've created an environment where it's safer, people feel like it's safer to be there. So you guerrilla a sign and you make the crosswalk a little bit more visible, and maybe you put a crosswalk sign and you try to get people to use it. All of a sudden, if more people are using it, but the people driving the car are still acclimated to it being a crosswalk that's not often used, people have been trained that they can be on their phone, they can be going faster than they should be going. They don't have to make a full stop, but more people are using the crosswalk. So you get into a situation where drivers have been habituated to the design of the road, and you're introducing a more vulnerable population of people walking, and it could be bad. So all that to say is, like, you can do proof of concept projects. Those are, if you're going to try to incentivize more people, like pedestrians interacting with a cross-traffic vehicular area, it's like, it's best to do proof of concepts where, like, you're keeping pedestrians away from that area, like where there's a lot of cross-traffic, and you can do like guerrilla stuff there more safely. If you are trying to do something with a proof of concept and a crosswalk, it's best to like put a proposal together, take it to the city or take it to whoever, and be like, we think we can improve this. We could test it, but this test needs to be done in a way that, like, it's announced to the public. It's made like very visible with signage before people get up to the intersection, and it's transmitted ahead of time. It's made very public that, like, we're changing the streetscape. Please be aware, like caution signs, and making it very public, because if people are aware of the change, they pay attention to it, they'll be more mindful, and chances are you'll draw their attention to it, and they'll be able to, validate it. They'll actually see it and say, oh, this does make sense. Yep.
And like I've even seen like people from my school jaywalk not even near the intersection at all. And I'm not sure, like, even if I put a crosswalk there, would they still jaywalk? Just like,
of course they would. Yeah. But so why do they jaywalk?
It's a straighter line.
It's a straighter line. Why? So this is like, again, when you get into how cities were built historically, like a city block is a certain size for a reason, because it was an efficient way to plan. So you have a square block that's a fixed, predictable measure that's efficient, right? Why would I walk another half a block to get to a crosswalk if, like, the most logical path, and the fastest path is this way. But when you get out into, rural country and you get into the suburbs, it was designed for a car, right? It wasn't thinking about people walking, and therefore, if it's another half a mile, who gives? Like, who cares? Because this is where the intersection for the cars is. That's where the crosswalk should be. It's like no. But if people are walking from the high school to here, they're not in a car. So a mid-block or a closer crosswalk would make more sense for people walking. But that's going to introduce another conflict point for pedestrians and vehicles along that path. And so if you wanted another crosswalk there, you'd have to have, by federal regulation, you'd have to have a couple 100 feet in both directions, signage, a speed limit change. You'd probably have to build, depending on the side of the road, an island in the middle, right, where a pedestrian could stop halfway if they needed to for cross traffic. So it becomes a very large project to implement a very small design change on a high-speed, high-traffic, multi-lane road for just one pedestrian crosswalk. And it's hard to justify if you're saying, like, well, yeah, but 15 people a day might use it. But they're going to be like, yeah, but 175 people drive on it every day. So who's the more prioritized user?
This is just negative feedback. People see, cars are using it, I'm just using it. And like people in my area, they can afford it. It's not like they need to, like they want, like, I mean, at least from what I know, there's a lot of people at my school that are parking lots filled with cars. I'm sure a lot of them are parking because people walking is just like it's natural, it should happen. And then it's just like this is frustrating because I mean I thought it would just be like we pay a company and then we have to take into account people maybe won't even use it because they don't want to walk that like it, and then there's like the fact that like that road, it's like I think it's like 40 hours, so the fact that they have to like choose it again, it's like it's pretty good to change.
I mean, it's 40, but nobody goes 40.
I mean, no, but like people still cross that like stop sign, but like they don't. So like building an island would just be like another thing, and then like
Maybe a roundabout. It's like you could do like a roundabout, maybe.
roundabout. What do you think about roundabout?
I like a roundabout, but I'm probably in the minority.
I mean, I like
But they make sense for a lot of users. Some of the challenges with roundabouts, people, because of their design, especially in the U.S., I mean, people will still go through them at very high speed. So it can still be a challenge to have multiple conflict points with people. It also increases the potential conflict points depending on how the crosswalks traverse the roundabout. Like, because a roundabout might have like a straight through, it might have a right turn, and so that's 2 conflict points in just one direction. And if you have 3, then you have 6 conflict points. So anyway, it's more complicated. It's not as easy as anybody wants it to be. It doesn't mean it's not worth doing. It means it's probably more worth doing the harder it is, because like, you're right. Of course it's not going to change because the system is just sort of like this positive feedback loop of only reinforcing the current reality as opposed to incentivizing change. But, so the trick is picking a project and doing a demonstration that has value. How do you establish value?
So, like,
I mean, how would you establish value? So if your goal is you want to get people to walk more to a specific place, how do you go about establishing which place is the most valuable?
I think for them, everyone goes to the gas station, but like there's also a whole bunch of buildings there that are like for lease.
Yeah.
So if you put like like a supermarket there, people wouldn't have to drive to Schnucks or to Hy-Vee, which is really far down the road. They just have to like walk to it. And since there's already crosswalk there and like a 4-way stop, they maybe do it.
Yeah.
It's something like the neighborhood goes in.
But outside of the existing built and existing sort of like points of interest, so gas station, supermarket, what are the other places that people might want to go to that they can walk to?
It's like there's like, because like everybody in my area, at least like what I know, we always come out either here or like we go to like somewhere that's maybe like 10 minutes away.
Sure.
We just drive there. So it's not like a huge issue, but like at the same time, that means that we're not all. And then like, so like, I mean, with like the current areas, we have like a gas station, like a little like shop.
Uh-huh.
But I'm not sure if they're still running.
They're still running. That place is
So what is it?
There's
it's a boba shop.
Okay.
a shop, and then on like there's like another side of like the other side. But it's very low visibility, at least from what I know, because like nobody in my high school was like, hey, let's stop at like the Mayflower restaurant, let's go there, or like there's even like a little block where I think there was like a parlor area, and there even used to be a bakery when I was really young, but they're out of business.
Sure.
So it's like low visibility on like that kind of thing. So like maybe but even then, like how do you compete against like, and then that's like the whole other issue. Like trying to get people like more involved when like there's more lucrative areas to hang out. I think teams are a major like, you know, social area and development in our lives. Like we tend to be very friend-centric.
Sure.
So we want to hang out with our friends. We have some time to do that, and we always want to go out to location. But like if there's like a mall that's further away, we can just drive there. Like,
Sure. But so, I mean, this is part of it, right? Getting back to the incentive system, the sociality of neighborhoods, or the lack of sociality in neighborhoods. These are all very important things of how a community, how a neighborhood, how a location thrives. So this concept of placemaking is, how do you get people to engage with the places they live? How do you get them to get out of their homes, out of their apartments? What are the places of interest? What are the gathering places within a community? And then how do you build the circuitry between those places to experience them in new and novel ways? And sometimes you have to do social engineering, and you have to say, you have to build the experience, you have to build the event for people to engage with it in a different way. So what that's looked like for us in Bike Peoria and other places and social groups is like, we meet up, you walk or you ride your bike to a place that I already go to by car, but you make it a social event with people. It's the same place, it's just a different way of engaging with one another in or to that place. And so for you, it might be like, okay, well, do we go to the boba shop and we like work with them and they program some event where they do like, there's other things happening at the boba shop. Maybe it's like somebody DJing, or like an afternoon of some other thing, or you get somebody to like bring a food truck there. And you work with them to just create an event, and the goal of the event is to like, hey, we're gonna meet up and ride our bikes or walk or whatever. And you try to like explicitly incentivize people to do something different. But sometimes you have to build the event and build the reason and you have to do something different fundamentally to get people to want to do something different.
Even like one of the big things that I thought was always like a great idea when I was like first starting in high school was like the idea of letting high school students kind of like go out for lunch. Of course, like there's a huge issue with that. Like if we did that, then like yeah, all these programming things would work, because like in my neighborhood there was like a point, like in the summertime so we'll have like the food trucks come over and I can just walk in. It's great. It's in the neighborhood and it's amazing. But like otherwise I don't really have any reason to be walking outside. like if we like made our high school like if we walked to so many schools, I mean, of course they're scared that the kids are gonna do drugs and like go out and get kidnapped.
They're gonna do that anyway.
Yeah, they do it anyways, but like from that.
Yeah, I know from experience. They do it anyway.
So like, I mean, have you ever like thought about like how high schools could like implement this whole idea of like they allow women to go out and
I mean, part of it is again just like a system of shared trust, and that trust is like harder sometimes when it necessitates like getting in a car and driving 15 minutes away. It's easier when you're like, oh yeah, I can walk 5 minutes to like 6 places. So that part of it's that challenge again of like a permission structure to like go far away during the day. The point could be made like, it's a useful skill to have if you're going to go to college and you're going to go in the working world. You should be able to manage your time and come back to the place you're supposed to be. I mean, those are useful skills. But again, it introduces liability to the school in ways that I'm not super sensitive to, but I'm sure administrators are. But I think it doesn't have to necessarily, that's a harder uphill climb. I think you instead of working from the top down in that way, you work from the bottom up, and it doesn't have to be during the school day, it could be after. And you program an event after with a group of people and say, hey, after school, we're going to walk to the boba shop together. We're going to ride our bikes, and we're like going to go on the bike ride on the trail. And you could actually ride into Peoria, a couple miles, or walk, probably ride. But like, anyway, so you can think of like on the weekends after school, you start engaging people and you build a culture of doing something differently, or you just person by person, group by group, just get people to do stuff in different ways, but you have to program fun activities, novel activities, like humans like novelty. And so like you have to start doing it that way to get people to like even consider doing it. Even consider it doing a different way during the school day, So like the more you have to do a couple times to make it like positively reinforcing, and then humans, our psychology is like, if it was positively reinforced with a group, and there's all these co-benefits of doing stuff in groups, the more likely you'll be to repeat that positive behavior alone.
I think it's like the fact that it's so cool.
Totally.
That probably affects it.
Oh yeah. I mean, it makes it something that's disincentivized, makes it more disincentivizing, unless you really like the cold, like I do. But
The only thing is like, wow, this is like pretty hard to put in suburbia, I guess, because like my friend, she lives in a suburban area, but she lives in California, and like in California, her suburban area has like a mall like 2 miles away from her, not 2 miles, not even 2 miles, like at the entrance of her. It's not a mall, but it's like one of these like little sections.
Sure.
It's just like really close to her house, and